Hello and welcome to another episode of AB Talks, where we speak to C-suite executives and leaders shaping industries in the Middle East and around the globe. Joining us today, we have Dr. Ahmed Ali Attiga, the Chief Executive Officer of the Arab Petroleum Investments Corporation, also known as APICORP. Thank you, Dr. Ahmed, for joining us here on the show today.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure to have you here on the show, Dr. Ahmed.
Thanks.
We've already seen Egypt getting set to host COP27. The UAE is set to host COP28. And all eyes around the world are now moving to the Middle East, especially countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, who have set to say ambitious net zero targets and have started implementing projects, solar, wind, and the likes.
Correct.
In your opinion, are the measures that are being taken sufficient, or are we likely to see more initiatives like this in this regard?
Thank you very much. This is a very important question, and I also thank you again for having me on this very important discussion. The discourse on energy transition has to start changing, and having the COP27 and the COP28 in the region in 2022 and 2023, I think will be a great opportunity for this change to happen, because an energy transition that is balanced, that is proactive, that is inclusive, requires the dialogue to be much wider between all the stakeholders than what has taken place in the COP26, for example. The region in particular sits at the intersection of both sides of the transition. It's one of the largest hydrocarbon producers, and at the same time, it has embraced and started in serious measures the diversification of the energy mix. And this is how the transition ought to be looked at. It's not a zero-sum game where one side wins and the other side loses. It's not the objectives of the energy transition should not be a mutually exclusive ones, but rather an integrated process of diversifying the energy mix and making all elements of the mix greener and cleaner, if you will. So COP27 and COP28 following that should be the forum for this discourse and this description of the transition to take shape and to include everybody. In COP26, for example, the oil producers were not even invited. Mm-hmm. And without an inclusive process that includes producers of hydrocarbon, the whole transition can be in jeopardy. At the end of the day, energy security is very much important for the energy sustainability and the energy transition to succeed and to happen.
Speaking of inclusion for energy security and energy diversification, earlier this year, APICORP, along with the Saudi-based Islamic Development Bank, announced the Infra Initiative, a $1 billion private sector fund, as you mentioned earlier to me. In your opinion, how important is it to make the private sector also part of this conversation, and how will such public-private partnerships help in achieving our energy diversification goals?
Sure. This is a very good question to explain how the partnerships between multilateral financing institutions can help in both accelerating the energy transition in the right balanced direction that I explained, and at the same time mobilize additional funding to the investments and the projects and the transactions that are required in this direction. We both are multilateral financial institutions. In the case of APICORP, owned by the 10 Arab oil producers, who are also members of the Islamic Development Bank. What this fund is all about is to identify infrastructure transactions in the widest scope of infrastructure, including, of course, energy infrastructure, and try to finance these projects by either debt or equity, with mobilizing also additional funding from other players who come in partnership with us, and focusing on the private sector. At the end of the day, the role of the private sector in the energy investment space has accelerated over the last few years. APICORP issues an annual energy investment outlook for the next 5 years, and clearly over the last 5 years or so, the participation of the private sector in executing energy and infrastructure projects have grown by 20-25%. Using different schemes, you have public-private partnerships, you have private equity, you have project finance, again, through the mobilization that could happen, mobilization of funding that could happen by having both APICORP and the Islamic Development Bank bringing other commercial and other MDBs with us for this objective. It's an ambitious target of 1 billion. It will also focus on countries that are coming out of conflict in the region or are in the middle of a transition where the hydrocarbon and the energy sector plays a key role in that transition and that transformation. APICORP, for example, is owned by countries in the region who are coming out of conflict, who are probably some of them still in conflict, and the role of the energy sector in how these countries will shape their future forward will be key. So supporting private investments in these areas will be very much required.
And you're right, Dr. Ahmed. We can't possibly continue this conversation without addressing what people are calling the elephant in the room in this regard, the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which we have already seen has started to increase commodity prices, and crude oil prices have stayed and hovered above $100 per barrel. In your opinion, how long is this impact of such a conflict likely to last on the sector? And does this create any energy investment opportunities that we need to look at in the current state and for the future?
Certainly, the uncertainties in the world have taken a very dangerous turn globally with the Russian-Ukraine war that unfortunately started a few weeks ago at the wake of also a pandemic that has affected the whole globe over the last 2 years. So I think it would be difficult to predict the level of and the magnitude of the uncertainties that this war will unfold. The early signs, as you mentioned, in terms of supply chain disruptions, in terms of inflation, and other macro and microeconomic effects are very worrying. We hope that escalation doesn't happen and that containment at the end of the day limits the damage that this global crisis has caused. Certainly the effect on the energy sector, particularly oil prices, has already been felt and seen. It's very difficult to predict how the oil market will behave going forward, particularly that Russia is a key member of the OPEC Plus alignment, and the OPEC Plus its resilience and the fact that the OPEC Plus have kept their framework agreement for all this time is what saved the market from severe fluctuations. Now with a disruption in this setup, particularly with what's happening in Russia, in particular as a major oil producer, producing over 10 million barrels per day, I think it's very difficult to predict what the impact will be, let alone the escalation of the military side of the confrontation. In every crisis, there is sometimes opportunity in disguise. In the short term, probably higher oil prices for this region may lead to more investments that are very much needed, particularly in the exploration and production, an area that has seen a decline in investments. However, a very high oil price is not good neither for the consumers nor for the producers. And again, we hope that the equilibrium that the oil market has seen over the last, and stability has seen over the last few years will be restored. More at the more broader sense, I think risks of stagflation could be real, and this will have a compounded implications on many aspects of life, both in this region and in the world at large. So I think let's hope that this is contained and we don't see a catastrophic implications.
Before I let you go, I have to pick your brain now that I have you here for this discussion. Could you run us through some of the challenges that we're likely to face within the sector in 2022? As we've let go of 2019, 2020, we see precautionary measures being taken away. Are there any new challenges that we need to face, and how can we turn those into opportunities?
You have, first of all, the energy transition challenges, and how all stakeholders will play it out in order to have an inclusive transition that does not jeopardize the energy security and the energy affordability. And let's see how the two upcoming COPs can strike that balance. You have the oil markets and fluctuations and volatility that could happen in the oil prices. We thought that we have been saved from that aspect. It seems that a huge surprise was in the making. Then you have still the effects of the pandemic on demand, on supply chains. And now with another global crisis, this could see a different level of intensity. And finally, you have countries that have to take fiscal measures, austerity measures as well, that may have implications on the repercussions on the sector itself and the wider economies, and may disrupt the plans that were in place in many countries of the region and elsewhere for economic diversification and energy diversification. So I'd like to always see the half full cup. Let's see how that unfolds and whether there is a light at the end of the tunnel in 2022, given all these challenges and all these risks that have suddenly become very real and concerning.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed, for sharing your time and insights with us. It's been a pleasure to have you on this show.
Thank you very much. This has been a great opportunity, and I hope we can always remain in touch.
Definitely. Until next time. For those of you watching, don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe below for more such interviews with experts in the industry. That's all for now, and until next time, goodbye.